Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, and I'm once again joined by journalist, geopolitical analyst, Pepe Escobar. Hi, Pepe. How are you doing today?
I have no idea. I am on a different cosmic sphere. I just
Great.
arrived in NATO stan. I was in South America. It was fantastic. I just arrived in NATO stan, and after our talk, I'm disappearing in the French countryside by the sea, away from everything. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Before we get started, everyone, be sure you hit that like button. That's how we boost this stream in the algorithm so more people can hear what Pepe has to say. Also, be sure to check out the video description where you can find Pepe Escobar's Telegram and Twitter, where you can follow all of his work. He contributes to quite a few publications. And you can also find all the ways you can support this channel from Patreon, Substack, YouTube, and many other options. But let us get started, Pepe. So I wanted to begin, actually, a lot has happened since we last spoke. But I thought we could begin with what I was actually in China at the time when you reported on the Israeli counterattack, or at least the counterattack that was to come. And you had an inside source tell you, and I want to just pull up the initial tweet. Okay. Let's see if I can find the right one, because here we go. Here is the initial tweet. Oh, well, no, this isn't the initial tweet. This is actually the correction.
I have them all this is up. The second. This was the
right.
Yeah.
So let me pull up the right. But as we do this, please describe what your source, I believe it was in Asia, correct? What they had to say, about Israel's use of an F-35 to try to
Danny,
go nuclear on Iran.
This story is closed. I'm not going back to it. I'll do as a special favor for you and the viewers. I closed the story on Twitter and Telegram. We have to wait and see what happens next, because the verdict about this explosive information will be delivered in time and by everything that is happening, which is incredibly volatile, incredibly important. To sum it all up, of course, I was all sorts of imbeciles on different gradations who have no access to intel, don't know anything about Asia, don't travel, don't have historic knowledge, whatever, started saying that I was propagating fake news. So I will have to address this again, even though I try to be Taoist and Buddhist about it. But considering that you're dealing with a tsunami of imbeciles, you have to remind them of their own imbecility. I would never risk 40 years of work publishing something that I could not trust and verify. And this is something that friends like Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, Alistair Crook, etc., they know that. They said that in public, and they said it to me. Cy Hirsch talked to one of his friends and said, I trust Pepe. Coming from Cy Hirsch, I don't need anybody else, in fact. But I will have to go back to the point again. Essentially, I was in South America on a Saturday morning, early in the morning, it was night in Asia, and I received on my smartphone something absolutely explosive, which I had to read 3 or 4 times. So no, this is actually fake news, or this is a prank, right? And then I launched my first batch of questions, and they answered. It was a high-level Asian intel source. I cannot get into details for obvious reasons. And essentially, they confirmed and reconfirmed. That's it. They said, I can only print this if you're absolutely sure. And they were absolutely sure. People who don't know how things work in Asia, they need to know that when you are a foreigner and you live in Asia and you build your network and you meet people in person many times and they learn to trust you as much as you trust them, this is an unbreakable bond. This is an extremely serious thing. So because I moved to Asia, I have to remind again, that was 30 years ago in April 1994. So I built an extensive network all across Asia, different parts of Asia, starting with Southeast Asia, then moving to South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia. Obviously, an information like this is, you can tell right away there are many holes in it. And this was correctly pointed out by military analysts. I talked to a physicist friend of mine, formerly with CERN. It's one of the world's top physicists, for that matter. But the thing is, as time went by, I understood more or less what happened, especially when in 48 hours, I had a confirmation, a surefire confirmation that my original source was not the original source. The original source was, as far as I can tell you all, a big power. These people don't put out an information like this by chance. They wanted people to pay attention to the message. So talking to other intel analysts and other analysts, for that matter, we came to the conclusion that even if the details of the message were fuzzy, sketchy, vague, and in many aspects implausible, like, F-35 nuclear bomb crossing from Israel across Syria or Iraq all the way to Iran, refueling, EMP, etc. Altogether, absolutely impossible. So we all agree on that. But the shaping of the information, I called it the information in caps. The way it was shaped, it was delivering a very, very strong message. Over and over again, I was asking, are they retracting it? Can they confirm it? Are there going to be any more details? And these are the answers that I got. They are not retracting it. Nobody is retracting it. Both intel agencies are not retracting it. There will be no more details. That's it. I pressed and pressed and pressed for it for 72 hours, in fact. So I think I did 3 or 4 Telegram posts about that. And the last one was a small recap where I closed the case and I opened the case for public scrutiny. The core of the information and the shape of the information will be judged in time, because we are living already in a new paradigm, which was started, by the way, by Iran itself with their response to the attack against the consulate ambassador's residence in Damascus. And this was supposed to be the Israeli counter response. The best analysts in the business agreed that the quadricopter Israeli response was a joke. So this was not the real response. So something else was afoot. From there to F-35 nuclear bomb, EMP over Iran, of course, is a stretch of cosmic proportions, intergalactic proportions. So because I trusted my 2 sources, the big power and the other intel agency, because they did not retract, I kept it from beginning to end as the raw intel that I received it. I did not analyze it. In fact, I wrote a long column analyzing especially the holes in the hole, with the help of a lot of people, from from Scott Ritter's analysis to my physicist friend to other physics specialists to inputs by Ray, Larry, etc. But I decided not to publish. I prefer that the information speaks for itself with all its inconsistencies and contradictions, and the shape of the message speaks for itself, and especially something that I heard from a senior Russian diplomat. I didn't hear anything from Russia. There were 2 very important things that I heard concerning Russia. That the original information by the big power was confirmed by themselves independently of Russia. I almost fell on the floor when I learned that. Because from the beginning, I was assuming that this was, let's say, an inter-Asia big power collaboration. Not at all. So the intel services of the big power confirmed independently that this happened. And of course, this is extremely sensitive because according to the way they packaged the information, there was a Russian missile involved with no details whatsoever. If it was a hypersonic, if it came from the Black Sea, if it came from Tartus, if it came from the Caspian, no details whatsoever. I pressed and pressed and pressed, nothing. And then I heard something from a senior Russian ambassador. He says, yes, it is entirely plausible. And if it happens, no one will talk about it. There will be a wall of silence. That happened to be the last paragraph of the original message that I received from this Asian intel service. They were saying that all the powers involved reached a consensus, I'm paraphrasing, that nobody is going to talk about it. This never happened. And the Russian diplomat also said something very important. Personally, he said, I am against something like this going out on social media. So, in fact, I am to blame, in fact, because the intel services that linked that to me, obviously they knew that this would end up on Twitter X, at least. So, and they never, then I asked again, and they said, it doesn't matter. If it's in the public domain, it doesn't matter because the information we received checks and the original source maintains that this was the information. So, of course, all this is very, very, it's an extremely complex, subtle affair. And no wonder someone like Cy Hirsch understood what I was trying to do. Cy does this all the time. Sometimes he receives raw intel and he publishes. In this case, I decided to publish the raw intel without talking to anybody first. I could have picked up the phone and called Andrei Martyanov and said, Andrei, what do you think about that? And Andrei would deconstruct it in 3 or 4 paragraphs. So I took a risk to put the raw intel in the public eye. Okay, let's see what happens, because the message is way more important than the details. So that's why I decided in the end to close the matter, as I did. I was still in traveling. It was crazy. I was traveling around Brazil, and I had this on my mind, and I had the BRICS, Russia, and China on my mind all the time. So it was a completely crazy trip that started in the craziest way possible. So absolutely no regrets. The public is going to judge this information a few weeks from now, a few months from now. If you look at what happened at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization defense meeting last week, in fact, you have some hints. Yeah, this is the theme of the column that I'm writing, that I was writing before talking to all of you guys. So, it's the facts on the ground and on different grounds will judge if this information is completely absurd, if this big power intel services are fabricating something, and if I detect anything concerning the veracity of the information. I already said that in one of my tweets, X. I will retract everything and I will publicly apologize to everybody, which is the right thing to do, right? So for the moment, we are on a waiting game. Let's see if the facts from now on prove that the information is largely correct.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was in China and people were asking me, a lot of people follow you. they rely on you. I think that's a testament to all the hard work that you have done. So a few of the delegates on the trip were like, did you see what Pepe had to say? Did you see what Pepe had to say? What he reported? And when I looked at it, I was like, wow, that is just like shocking information.
It is shocking.
But at the same time, and maybe you can talk about some of the details of that, and maybe your thoughts on what on what was being said had happened in that leaked information you got, and then what now we know about Iran and Israel's so-called counter response. Because one thing that's striking is that Israel looks like a desperate, defeated. It looks like a country, a nation, whatever we want to call it, an entity. I know those who do not recognize the state of Israel will call it entity. That is very much it's seemingly in its current state willing to do whatever it can to protect and preserve its position and status. So I rely on people like Scott, like Andre, for the military, and Ray McGovern and people like that to understand the kind of nuts and bolts. But at the same time, in terms of politics and geopolitics, there's this reality that Israel is looking like this desperate mad dog without a leash. And so I'm curious about how you, as you were assessing not just the information you were being leaked, but then seeing afterward what happened, how that all connected for you, and what you think about this outcome.
It fits the pattern of a rabid dog on the loose and cannot even be controlled by the master. No question about that. Just look at what happened this past few weeks. Even before the attack in Damascus. You know that among the 4 possibilities that were being discussed by the war cabinet in Tel Aviv to as a counter response to the Iranian response, which was carefully calibrated, was an attack on Natanz. Can you believe that this was on the table?
Hmm.
They were considering attacking nuclear facilities in Iran. So, literally nothing is off the table for them. This is in modern history, you won't find a biblical psychopathological genocidal entity like this. And in history, there are few matches as well. The problem is, as we all know, we don't need to repeat it, that they control most of the narrative across the collective West, not across the global majority anymore. And even Russia and China, Iran, obviously, even Russia and China, they are reaching their limits. And this is something that I could see quite clearly, even following from a distance, in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization defense ministers meeting, where the new defense minister of China met personally and discussed in detail, personally, with both the defense minister of Iran and Shoigu in Russia, everything from Ukraine to West Asia and Gaza. And we see that the Chinese position on Gaza is becoming, stronger and stronger. They are practically calling it a genocide, which coming from the Chinese, this is wow, leaps and bounds away and ahead of their very cautious foreign policy. They are coordinating with Russia how they manage or try to manage the whole Gaza tragedy inside the UN. Of course, they are hitting a wall all the time with the American vetoes. We cannot say that this was discussed face to face between Wang Yi and even Xi with that thing that is considered a little more than an annoying insect in Beijing, little Blinken, in his absolutely tragic visit to Beijing a few days ago, where everybody saw the video, no? A low-level, third-rate functionary of the American empire, he makes the big panda wait in his own palace room. And he was granted an audience after months of procrastination. And you can hear Xi Jinping asking an aide when he's going to leave. And the aide said, tonight. And Xi Jinping looks slightly more relieved. So this is the state of U.S.-China relations. And you have this specimen going to Beijing to threaten the Chinese in Beijing. So I would say the recorded response by Wang Yi especially was quite clear. In fact, the ball is in your court. You choose cooperation or, between commas, a downward spiral. And in fact, it's Wang Yi telling Blinken, this is your downward spiral, not ours. And you choose it, and you are choosing it. So this could not be more volatile, in fact. Next week, we're going to have Xi Jinping coming here to NATO Stan. He's coming to France to suffer Le Petit Roi in person, but very, very important. He's going to Belgrade. Do you know why? To celebrate the 25th anniversary of the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in the NATO war that started the forever wars of the 21st century. This could not be more volatile, in fact. So it's this, again, China sending a message. Look, we don't forget stuff like that. And somebody's going to pay sooner or later, or even if you have to wait for another century. So in the middle of all that, when Russia and China look at Gaza in tandem. And last week at the SCO, we could see that in trio was Russia, China, and Iran looking at Gaza. So they're looking at the hegemon and looking at the forever wars from Ukraine to Gaza in concertation. I would say that this, in the next few weeks and months, could even have some sort of validation of this incandescent leak that happened only a few days ago. So we are reaching a stage of a practically frontal clash. It is very, very, very worrying, because when you add all the components of an empire in decline, led, between commas, by a uber mediocre elite, between commas, of third-rate functionaries, fourth-rate functionaries, with a walking corpse as president of the United States, elections looming, or they know that they're going to lose and they got to do something in the next few months. The inevitable collapse of NATO as a whole in the black soil of Novorossiya, which is a question of how long this is going to take. Could it end this summer? It's a possibility. Could it end before the American elections? Another possibility. Could the Russians keep doing a sort of death by 1,000 cuts Chinese style and prolong it to exactly the point where they wanted, and then the final blow? It's the third scenario. Only Putin, Gerasimov, Shoigu, and Patrushev. These are the four ones that know what's going to happen next. So when the empire looks at all that, and not to mention the new student protest movement in American universities, but now in Western universities, even reached here in the domains of Le Petit Roi, Sorbonne and Sciences Po. It's like you are, it's like May 68, but this is not May 68. This is May 2024, and the protest is not war in Vietnam. The protest is against Project Zionism as a whole. So this is really, really serious, So when you look at all that, you can imagine the degree of the desperation road that they are in the Beltway, right? And Russia and China, they look at it, they are very realistic. They have their own timetables. They know that the BRICS timetable this year is crucial. I'm going back to Russia at the end of this month, among other things, to follow BRICS, and then the St. Petersburg Forum in early June, and then the BRICS Ministerial in June as well, which is going to lay down the roadmap to the big meeting in Kazan in October. So you see these things are in parallel tracks. Desperation track on one side, and coalescing of the multipolar drive in parallel. And when they meet, which I would say one of the classic encounters this year was little Blinken goes to Beijing, you see what happens in front of you. The images speak for themselves. You don't even need a comment.
Yeah, and I think everything that you said leading from that report that you received, that leak that you received, kind of gives the impression of this convergence, this real convergence between this desperate, dying world order led by the United States, the unipolar order, which has as a huge expression the Project Zionism, as you said, and what it is doing. And then, of course, all of these events that transpired with the multipolar war, what Iran did, what its actual response, its actual retaliation to Israel, and then Israel's whatever you call that thing that it decided to do afterward. It was just so, it's not even worth mentioning because it had absolutely no impact. It only, to me, reinforced how Iran, I think somebody said in the comments, check and mate, how it actually was able to reestablish deterrence, and it was a very genius move in that regard. But then everything afterward, from Blinken's visit to China to what's happening in Ukraine, there is this mounting desperation. And I think going back to that leak, while the details may be hard to confirm or maybe not hard to believe,
To
the
believe.
idea of a
True.
nuclear confrontation is absolutely not hard to believe. And it's not hard to
Exactly.
understand that that's where things are going. But final comments on this.
Sorry, Danny, because I was already thinking of, I'm trying to focus nowadays on the auspicious side for humanity, especially in this crucial year, the BRICS year, the year of the great decision of BRICS. So while I was in Brazil, it was in the first few days. This thing exploded on a Saturday morning. I had arrived straight from the airport on a Thursday night. I went straight to a conference. And then on Friday, I was trying to, settle down in South America a bit. And on Saturday morning, you have a bomb in front of you. So I was, at all the time, I was confronting. And for me, it was particularly vivid and quite emotional as an experience. In these first few days, I was in my hometown. I was born in São Paulo. That's where I lived the first 20-something years of my life. And I said, wow, I can live this thing here. It hit me while I'm here. And at the same time, I have to pay attention to what Russia and China are going to do in the next few days, and Iran as well. And I am at one of the BRICS. And I'm on the road in one of the BRICS and looking at the connections between these three BRICS and the other ones as well. It was amazing because in the next few days, I learned about China in Brazil. Amazing stuff that I had no idea because I'm very, very far away. I learned, for instance, about China in Peru. A guy came from Lima to see one of my conferences, and he told me about the port that Costco is building south of Lima to export to Asia. And then I mixed with the 5 railway corridors that maybe will link Brazil to Peru in the next few years. And then I was looking at what was happening. Well, I was, just to give an idea, while I was between traveling out of Rio, in Sao Paulo, yes, you can read some of it in this column. In Sao Paulo, guess who was meeting in Sao Paulo? The BRICS finance ministers. This was a major, major, major meeting. They were talking about de-dollarization. They were talking about the different mechanisms that they are putting in place as payment settlements. Everybody said, look, we are on the road. They were talking about a new system based on blockchain. So it was absolutely extraordinary to see this happening in one of the BRICS. And the main actors, of course, were the 2 leading BRICS, Russia and China. And on top of it, the repercussions of the famous leak, right? So you can imagine, I didn't sleep for more than a week, in fact. And of course, in the back of my mind was always, are we reaching the crucial months where something could derail in a way that is really apocalyptic between now and the American elections? It could be a false flag. It could be some sort of nuclear play. It could be mega desperation hitting because they know that Russia is practically is going to finish what they want to do in Donbass and going all the way to the Dnieper, and even considering crossing the Dnieper, which is another possibility as well. So no wonder, all these things are happening in conjunction, and you try to sideline the apocalyptic scenarios, and at the same time, they usually predominate in virtually every analysis. It's an unseen moment in modern history, I would say. And it's very disturbing, of course. To keep our sanity is very, very hard. So I would say that the people who are guiding us are the rational actors, especially in these 3 BRICS, Russia, China, and Iran. And it's not by accident that they are coordinating at the highest level, including militarily. Very, very important. This was what being discussed essentially at the SEO meeting last week in Astana, in Kazakhstan. And at the same time, we see the convergence of the BRICS in terms of our project for multipolarity, which is geoeconomic project as much as is geopolitical. No? But you know, the ghost of something horrible that could happen at any moment, I think it's in our minds all the time, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, and speaking of BRICS, so I wanted to actually, we can definitely transition to this. You just were in Brazil, and now I'm getting a report. So there's BRICS expanded. You've been on this program to talk about BRICS expansion. Of course, Brazil is an original member, but you were just in Brazil, and you often talk about the struggles that Brazil goes through to balance between the multipolar world and the unipolar world, given its geostrategic position.
Yes.
Now you have reports about Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is also on deck to join BRICS, as it was one of the several new admitted members. And I was reading reports today about this conversation again happening about possible Saudi-Israeli normalization, with the United States attempting to push Saudi Arabia to drop Chinese technology, and Saudi Arabia trying to use this potential normalization to supposedly push for Israel to come to the table about a Palestinian state and to stop the genocide. It's unclear whether this will happen. I think a lot of this seems to be Biden attempting to get something of a victory in foreign policy terms before the election. But the fact that it is being reported, and the fact that it's highly likely that the United States is trying to broker such a thing, I think also shows the contradictions of even these newly admitted BRICS members and what they are, where they sit in terms of this multipolar project. So I'm wondering if you could talk about both Brazil and maybe bring in this Saudi Arabia and the others, and how they fit into all this, and how you feel like it's going to shape out as BRICS once again comes up for expansion this coming October.
The Saudi Arabia thing is a spin, Danny. That's another thing that I learned with my interactions with hardcore intel agencies from Asia. They told me something that I didn't know, that I learned for the first time. It's about the, from now on, unbreakable bond between Saudi Arabia and China. And it gets even juicier because there is a personal element in it. And I cannot get into details for obvious reasons, but it involves MBS owning a personal favor to Xi Jinping. So you can imagine what that means, right? And this coming from, So anything that the Americans are spinning about Saudi Arabia reactivating the adventure with Israel, which would include IMEC, the corridor that will be a sort of a new Silk Road, a Western New Silk Road, basically European Union, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and India, which is dead on the water as we speak. So all that for the moment is spin. Nothing serious happening. On the contrary, because Russia and China are very much focused on getting Saudi Arabia and Iran comfortable inside BRICS, discussing on the same table. This is something that Lavrov told us at our meeting in Moscow in late February. He said, our priority for the moment is to get everybody together, everybody comfortable, welcome the new members, and then we're going to start thinking about another expansion, considering that the list is at least 40 and growing by the day. Everybody wants to get into BRICS, right? So Saudi Arabia and Iran, with Russia and China supervising everything, this is the real deal. And obviously the Americans, they need to come up with a counter spin to that. based on fantasies, of course. And so once again, the facts now and from now on will dictate where we're going. The facts will tell us, oh, if there's going to be some sort of reapproximation between Israel and Saudi Arabia, or we're going to have a more influential role of Saudi Arabia inside BRICS. So this means that Russia and China are leading this train, and Saudi Arabia is on board. So the facts will speak for themselves, right? Just like our leak that we're discussing in the beginning. So we are in a crucial wait and see moment in all aspects, geopolitical and geoeconomic. In the next few weeks, in fact, we're going to have a major breakthrough on a sort of new de-dollarization plan that it's already written, that it has been academically approved, and I hope to be the first one to tell everybody about that. This is something that I've been following since last year. And it will involve soon a very important visit of Sergei Glaziev to China. And this will solidify things even more. So we're going to have big news, I think, before this ministerial BRICS conference next month in June. So that's where we are at the moment. The geoeconomic moves are, wow, mind-boggling. And geopolitically, it's a near clash territory, right?
Yeah, and I'm curious about how that fits in because I believe Vladimir Putin will be on his way to China very
This
soon
month,
after
it's
yes,
in
this
May.
month after
It's in May, exactly.
Xi Jinping gets done with Europe. I'm
Yes.
curious if you find there's any linkage there, what can be expected from that, given that there seems to be this timeline taking shape from the events in June that you talked about, and
You
then the
bet.
fall with BRICS expansion.
You remember, Danny, and all of you, that Putin and Xi met at the Winter Olympics in the beginning of February. I think it was February 4th or around that, which was, you remember, less than 3 weeks before the start of the SMO. And this meeting was absolutely crucial. It's not that Putin was saying, essentially, look, there's going to be a war in Ukraine and I'm stepping in. No, he was basically presenting the facts to see face to face and saying, look, they're forcing my hand. There's nothing else I can do. If I don't act, there's going to be a massacre of civilians in Donbass. They're massed at the border with 100,000 soldiers equipped and weaponized to death, and there will be a blitzkrieg, and they're going to take over Donbass. If I don't do anything, this is what's going to happen. I cannot allow this to happen, and my public opinion in Russia is going to kill me if I allow this to happen. So the point is, Xi Jinping, it's not that the Xi Jinping endorsed the SMO. Xi Jinping understood the facts behind the SMO that would lead to the SMO. That's a completely different story. Obviously, the Chinese could never approve it because it's bad for business. And it's bad for their business. It's bad for their New Silk Road business. It's bad for Trans-Siberian business. You know, what comes from China through the Trans-Siberian to Russia and the West. Through corridors across Russia, same thing. But they understood that there was no choice for Putin at the time. Just like they will understand, and Putin will understand, if they face something in the South China Sea, let's say in 2025 already. So because and this is something that no one in the Beltway, with a very few exceptions, is capable of understanding. The level of the Russia-China comprehensive strategic partnership now is all levels, including militarily. Why do you think they are thinking about from little blinking to Trump, if he's elected, another batch of mega sanctions against China? You have to stop collaborating with Russian industry or you're going to be sanctions. And the Chinese said, so what? If you don't understand the Russia-China strategic partnership, you have to live with it. Now it's a fait accompli, as we say here in France. It's a done deal. It's the most important strategic relationship in the world now. And this is the strategic relationship that is shaping where we're going next. BRICS, SCO, multipolarity, global majority, etc. So, and that explains the extra level of desperation when we have American politicians talking about the new axis of evil. Oh, well, they are not very clever. No? It's always the same shit. And the new axis of evil is Russia, China, Iran. Of course, the three most important BRICS. And when I said that in Brazil, people were looking at me like this, and I was trying to explain to them, look, there's a serious problem of sovereignty. Brazil, with this new government, as much as Lula is trying everything he can, he's very good at swinging in the middle of hit by all sides. But Lula now he doesn't have the stamina that he had before. He doesn't have he's not as dynamic as he was in his first two mandates. He's surrounded by collaborationists, fifth columnists. It's very complicated. His government, there are ministries that are literally working for the Americans. There's one minister in Brazil that is called the John Kerry minister. Another one is the George Soros minister. It's very, very serious. The country is completely polarized, and it's not sovereign. I'm very sorry to say that, but this is based on facts. And this is a fact that last week I was trying to confirm with everybody that I talked to. People close to the government, the financial market, top academics, etc. And there's more or less a consensus. No, we're not sovereign. We are under foreign interference, and Lula is surrounded by all sides, and he has to be extremely clever to dodge all sorts of pressures. I'm sure many of you remember that in the interval between the end of Bolsonaro and the beginning of the Lula government, Jake Sullivan went to Brasilia with the list. This is what you have to do. So it's an extremely complicated situation. Only a guy like Lula, who's a master negotiator, can try to negotiate out of it. But it's not a sovereign power. And then it was fantastic because I was having discussions with the old school in Brazil. They had outstanding intellectuals. Some published. I was given a book before my last conference. I was given a book that is absolutely devastating, explaining since the 19th century how the whole conformation of Brazilian society and later the Americas in the 20th century prevented Brazil from emerging as a big power. So when you put this all together and you compare to the three sovereigns, these are the three real sovereigns: Russia, China, and Iran. Then you understand why Brazil inside BRICS is not as relevant as it should be, but it cannot be when it's under full pressure by the hegemon. So it was great these past few days also to put in perspective all the internal complexities of Brazil. So, of course, the country where you're born, you have to pay extra attention, even if you're away for decades, which is my case, So I learned a lot this past few days, and I learned a lot about inside BRICS dynamics and what prevents Brazil from being one of the true leaders of BRICS. So now this role it should be Brazil's, and now it's played by Iran, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Well, and what's so, what is so striking about that too is from those on the outside, it's quite clear that Lula da Silva has to negotiate a pretty complex terrain when we can count several times in the last decade alone where Brazil's government has been under whatever it's called, lawfare, regime change, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
that has happened multiple times since over the last 10 years or so. So it's quite obvious that the internal dynamics are quite complex. And then we go to Saudi Arabia. I'm glad that you said that this is a spin, this attempt to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It would be suicide, certainly, for Saudi Arabia at this very hot moment to do such a thing and also reject Chinese economic assistance, which is just, as you said, mind-blowingly deep between Saudi Arabia and China. But at the same time, I think it's so important that you emphasize Russia, China, now Iran coming in, because these are the countries that are the power centers of all multipolarity. We see that, especially with China and Russia, what they're doing in relation to Gaza. I don't know if you've been following last month, Russia hosted the Palestinian resistance groups to talk about a unity government. Now China is doing the same.
China is doing the same
in
thing
the last
then,
couple of
exactly.
days. Yes. So
yes,
your reaction to that, to close up on this multipolarity point?
Yes, exactly. The column that I will finish the column after I talk to you and all of you guys. Exactly. This is part of the concerted Russia-China strategic partnership position on Gaza. They have, this is discussed really at the highest level. This is discussed, of course, at the level of Lavrov with Wang Yi, but it gets to the big panda and the big bear as well. And not to mention that they're going to be speaking in person in a few days from now. In fact, they're going to be this meeting in person is good. They're going to be setting, okay, let's do the roadmap for the next few months up to our meeting at the BRICS summit in Kazan in October. That's what's going to be. And it will involve everything from BRICS discussions, multipolarity, de-dollarization, and also, of course, West Asia. The role of Iran, their collaboration with Iran. Never forget, all of you, there are 3 strategic partnerships in play. Russia, China, China, Iran, and Russia, Iran. They are all linked by strategic partnerships. So no wonder they're discussing everything, So on the other side, we don't have that. On the other side, we have essentially a bunch of vassals in Europe. We have a hegemon that is lost in space, literally. And we have the aircraft carrier going completely crazy. What sort of strategic depth we have ahead? Less than 0. No wonder. We have threats. We're going to invade the Rafah. We're going to deport 1.4 million Palestinians. We're going to clear Rafah as we cleared North Gaza. That's what we got. It's another question, Danny, that is popping up, and I would say all over the place. I heard this from Asia. I heard this from Russia and post-Soviet space. I'm going to hear this I'm going to Italy soon. I start to hear this from Italy as well, and I heard it in Brazil as well. Who will be able to rein in the genocidal entity? Everybody across the global majority and even parts of the global north now is asking the same question. Okay, they broke all the rules. They crossed every red line anywhere. Who's going to rein them in? What does it take? What will it take? So I think this is probably the key question for this year and for the next few years. If you can get away with a genocide in front of global public opinion every day with images to prove it, you can get away with anything. You can get away with some sort of nuclear false flag operation, whatever,
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, the stakes are the same, when we would talk about sanctions on Russia, why China would be so concerned is because if the United States and Europe can get away with all these sanctions, regardless of the outcome of them, then China knows that it also has to prepare for that kind of thing. So if genocide is a degree in magnitude, even more severe than as terrible and as just absolutely devastating that sanctions can be. Luckily, they were not for Russia, and they haven't been for China. But Pepe, I wanted to close maybe to just talk about Ukraine. There is this actually right as we were about to speak, I was looking at the news, and as Xi Jinping is going to France soon
Mm-hmm.
and maybe as people see this video, if I post it later, he will have already gone. But right before Xi Jinping arrived, we have once again Emmanuel Macron talking about troops in Ukraine. He seems to say this. He said this in an interview with The Economist, and he seems to say this almost every other day, every week
Yes,
now.
absolutely. He's on a
Now
blitzkrieg
you
on that thing.
now you've talked to me about Mr. Edward Luttwak.
Yes.
He had this article earlier in April of this year, literally calling for on the Unheard how it is time to send NATO troops to Ukraine. So as you this very prominent neocon analyst scholar, he is calling for this. Now, I just wanted to show some of the cognitive dissonance here because you also reported this on your Telegram, but there is this cognitive dissonance with this issue of sending troops to Ukraine, given the state of things on the battlefield. Here is what on Twitter talking about the exhibition of captured NATO military equipment.
Exactly.
So we can
Yeah, yeah.
just see how
The
in Moscow.
Wunderwaffen.
So you can just go to Moscow and take a look at how this equipment is becoming the property of Russia. And we have the BBC talking about this. They are very, how should I say, unhappy about Russia flaunting, as they say, the hardware. But all of this speaks to a deteriorating situation for both Ukraine and NATO on the battlefield, making this constant demand, if not a foreshadowing of the future, very curious to me in terms of how this would shake out for NATO should Macron's deep, dark, psychoanalytic wishes and desires be met in the conscious realm. So, Pepe, your reaction to once again, and anything you want to say about the Ukraine conflict, given Mr. Macron's uh, uh, and
Écoute,
Luttwak and all of this talk about NATO troops.
no, Le Petit Roi is a joke, you know. Here, I just arrived here. I arrived here on Labor Day. May 1st is very important all across Europe
Right.
and South America and Latin America. There were protests, of course, there were protests in the street, and including protests against the stupidity of Le Petit Roi. Well, he's desperate. He's hated by 90% of the population, at least. I'm going to check this again. I'm escaping to the countryside. I love discussing in the countryside about Macron because everybody literally hates him. And hate him because basically it's the same argument. He's destroying classic traditional France, which is true because his agenda is Ursula von der Leyen's agenda. Guess, by the way, who's going to be the guest of honor when she meets Macron here? Guess, just guess who's the guest
is
of honor.
Is it Ursula? Is it Ursula von der Leyen? Is she the?
Can you? How cosmically?
I thought she was put in the customs section
Exactly. I was like,
in
right.
China when she.
Exactly. Now you have to declare what. How intergalactically stupid you have to be in strategic terms to invite somebody that is openly despised by the Chinese, not only Xi, but the Politburo, the whole system. And this is something that Macron did not learn. Do you remember that famous scene when Macron visited Beijing, that he went out, they took tea together. There was this wonderful 1,000-year-old music playing in the background. And she basically told Macron, look, if you are a sovereign, we respect you. Otherwise, not really. What does he do months later? He invites the toxic Medusa who runs basically the European foreign policy as a whole to the meeting. So it's amazing. So we should run We should run a poll all over the world. Who's the number one stupid Western representative of the elites? Is it Stoltenberg? Is it Macron? Charles Michel, all that. There's another one that I'm forgetting now. That's even or Little Blinky. That's a hard match. Huh? If you put them all together, along with Postula von der Leyen, wow. So you cannot take these people seriously, and nobody does, apart from the bubble where they operate. In fact, the bubble in Brussels now, the European Commission. The Elysee Palace, because they have nothing to show about anything. Macron is dreaming of the Olympic Games, which maybe he can parade Paris as okay. Paris is a world capital, but nowadays it's a shadow of the former Paris that we all learned to love. It's a city with unbelievable problems for a big city. And it can become very violent as well. So let's see what's going to happen. So he has nothing to show. And in terms of NATO in itself, one thing the people around Le Petit Roi understood, that the NATO that the Americans want for now and for the future does not include France. Does not include French leadership. And that's why he's trying to make himself, a necessity. We're going to send 2,000 troops. We're going to send whatever. And everybody's laughing about it because they know that French army is a joke and their weapons, apart from some missiles, are also a joke. They understood at the Elysee Palace that the NATO that the Americans want is Washington, Warsaw, London, the Chihuahuas in the Baltics, and Kiev. The problem is the Kiev angle is ashes to ashes, right? Chihuahuas in the Baltic don't even qualify as a joke. So basically it's Washington, London, Warsaw. So that excludes France and Germany completely. This is what essentially the Democrats want for NATO, what most of the deep state wants for NATO. And maybe the Republicans will buy into it as well. So there's nothing left for France. And obviously, Macron is not going to be a de Gaulle and pull out of NATO and build Franco-German force de frappe, attack force. No, this is not going to happen anyway. So it's a dead end for him. And not to mention the stories about his Madame Macron. I'm not going to get into it because then we get into
I've seen it.
Saturday Night Live territory. I prefer not to get into it.
But the fact that we have to mention it, I think it speaks volumes about the state of France. I mean, you talked about May Day being very important. You also had, in France, here's just some images, what you can kind of see, just, police, everywhere.
And Danny,
this is what they do.
And they're treating the students here like this as well, just like in Colombia. They are treating the students at the Sorbonne like this as well. It's the same thing. Right. And obviously, nobody. I'm here for less than 24 hours now. Nobody understands the student protests, how they migrated from the US to French universities. They say, oh no, but this is completely different from Mai 68. May 6. Of course it is different. It's a protest against Project Zionism. And this is something you can't understand in France because Paris is essentially controlled by Project Zionism. And you cannot say that out loud here. You see? So, in terms of cognitive dissonance, one of the capitals of the world is certainly Paris. There's no question about that. When I was in Brazil, it was amazing because in Brazil, even if it's a completely polarized country, you go to the big cities like São Paulo and Rio, you can have any sort of political discussion about anything. In Europe, you can't, especially here.
Yeah, well, it's also interesting. I wanted to just show, there's the image of the police, and you shared this as well on your Telegram on May Day, just beating down French people who are celebrating May Day. Here you have in Russia a completely different dynamic. And I'll just put the
Wonderful,
volume on.
wonderful.
It's just very not a lot of controversy here. Just people going about their day celebrating May Day, given its historic importance in
Absolutely.
Russia.
In Russia, yes.
Um, but you know, I think this speaks to a very particular dynamic with what's going on in Ukraine. You have Russia on the one side, incredibly stable. You have people like Klueba talking about how the situation is deteriorating. Everyone is saying this now in Ukraine. NATO continues, whether it's France or whoever else, Ursula. They continue to throw out all of these potential ideas. Now they're talking about U.S. Ukraine 10-year bilateral security
Yeah.
agreements, which will continue to prolong this conflict in their hopes. But then you also have Russia talking about, or at least the front lines are saying that things are collapsing, and that there are discussions and talks about how long can this truly go on? Will this be settled in some form by the end of this summer into the period leading into 2025? So I'm curious, Pepe, maybe your final thoughts on Ukraine, Project Ukraine, where it's heading, and what it reflects in terms of NATO's particular position.
Well, the cosmic humiliation is just around the corner. It would be a matter of minutes, hours, days, or months, but it's inevitable. And that explains all the moves coming from the hegemon and NATO as a whole. Well, Stoltenberg, a few days ago, if I'm not mistaken, he said that the entry of Ukraine into NATO is inevitable. What kind of world this guy lives in? This is complete absurd. So we cannot even pay attention to what they say anymore because they don't even know what they're saying. So when we look at the battleground, like Russia is conquering a village or a settlement practically on a daily basis. The meat grinder is advancing. Wow, but it's a solid meat grinder on a daily basis, and hardcore artillery, you name it, everything. So this is not going to change. They're going to think about, okay, how we want this to do we want to conclude this in a summer offensive? Do we want to prolong it later on? Are we going to cross the Dnieper or not? So the same questions, right? And then later on, of course, Odessa and Transnistria. But what months ago, even Lavrov starts saying it on the record. It will be defined in the battlefield. And then only a few days ago, Nebenzia at the UN said bluntly, the only thing to negotiate is the modality of how they're going to surrender. This is where we are now. The Russians, they don't advertise what they do. They're never as blunt. They're much more subtle. And now they're being blunt as hell. So this proves that, that this is a game changer, equivalent to Iran finally saying, your free lunch on West Asia is over, people in Tel Aviv. So, these are game changers running in parallel, actually. So that's where we are. So it's going to be very interesting as one of the key themes of debate when Putin meets Xi a few days from now. They will, of course, discuss this in detail. All right. And something could happen before June. BRICS ministerial. Don't forget that Gaza is a key theme for BRICS, for the global majority, and it's a very complex theme when it comes to involvement, or in fact non-involvement of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. because you can have their public opinions horrified by Gaza, but for the moment, MBS and MBZ, they did less than zero about Gaza compared to what Yemen has been doing. Yemen is being hailed all over the Islamic world as vanguard heroes. And people look at MBS and MBZ, they understand that they are trying to play a double game very uncomfortably. And obviously, Russia and China say, okay, where do you stand on Gaza? Because this applies to BRICS. BRICS are starting to have, I would say, they are coalescing their position on what's going on in Gaza. So soon we're going to have a BRICS position on Gaza. So the BRICS 10, they need a BRICS 10 position on Gaza. We're getting there. We're getting there. India is a very complicated thing to as well, you know. So, but the fact that all these processes are following, you know, the roads are parallel. Everything happens simultaneously. All the inconsistencies and all the dangers are crisscrossing all the time. But we can say that in the next 2 or 3 months, something big may happen. Nobody knows what, really, but something big may happen. And this would be a game changer equivalent to the Iranian response to the Israeli terror attack, in fact. What's going on in Ukraine in terms of the battlefield now configured towards NATO humiliation. And the fact that the Chinese, and this is incredible, you have just been to China, they're losing their patience. And now you can see them losing their patience. Now it's graphic. Now you have images to prove it. We will never believe that this would happen so fast. And they are already preparing themselves to next year, depending on who gets into the White House. They know what's coming. Right. They perfectly understood that these three existential threats, Russia, China, Iran, they are number one. And then everything will be focused on them, probably starting 2025. Yes. So we have only a few months of, let's say, we are in calm before the storm, and just wait for the storm.
Yeah, and maybe we can close just because on this with you, Pepe.
Thank you.
Because there's this key theme, sovereignty. When I was in China, that is what, if you ever go to China, I'm sure this is true in much, especially the big powers now, Russia, China. When you go to China, what is completely off the table, what is non-negotiable for everybody, not just, or at least 99% of people, it's not just the Politburo or Xi Jinping or the NPC or whatever government body you want to talk about. It's everybody. What's off the table is any incursion, violation of sovereignty, any idea that China's sovereignty will be sold out, will be diminished, that is off the table. And it's quite clear from China, and that's the impatience is that the United States, and of course whoever drags along with it, are continuously moving to not just violate China's sovereignty, but to try to take it away. They're trying to subdue China. And that's where the impatience is coming from. And it's quite clear from just the trajectory of China's policies. Look at this Europe trip. I mean, look at you said it before, who's being visited. Serbia, on the occasion, actually happened on my birthday. I think I was 9 years old when it happened. On the occasion of May 7, 1999, the bombing of Belgrade, which killed Chinese journalists, bombing of the embassy. Then you have Hungary, which is, while has its problems, is considered
Belt and Road. Belt and Road.
Yeah, exactly, the Belt and Road. And then in terms of so-called NATO members, Hungary is considered one of the few sovereign in terms of its policies, that it makes independent decisions. And then, of course, you have France, a very interesting decision, given that China uses France, I believe, as like a communication conduit of, hey, Europe, you need to be more autonomous. And it believes France is perhaps the most shaky link, given all that we just discussed with Macron's. He has these almost like fetishistic, Freudian desires, but at the same time, there is also geopolitical reality. I think China is very well aware of this. So sovereignty is the key theme here, in my
Yes,
estimation. I don't know if you have
absolutely.
any final comments, because it's Russia, it's China, it's Iran. These are the countries that are the sovereigns. They are the ones who cannot be budged. They cannot be shaken. And that's why they lead this multipolar world. And that's why they're making decisions the way that they're making them. But your final comment before I finally let you go.
Yes, of course. Yes, in my previous book, which I launched in early 2021, it's coming out in Italy now, Roaring Twenties. I call the main essay in this book, which I did for a think tank in Azerbaijan, in fact, is called The Three Sovereigns. So we were already thinking about Russia, China, and Iran as the three sovereigns at the start of the decade. And that's where we are now. These three sovereigns are setting the stage for the coming of the multipolar world. And it's not an accident that they are considering the three top existential threats to the empire of chaos. So this is where we are now, ladies and gentlemen. And for the moment, let's do a Bob Dylan. Let's sing "Shelter from the Storm," because the storm is coming.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Okay, Pepe. So everyone, for those who
Thank
want to follow Pepe Escobar's work, you can do so in the video description. There's his Telegram there, as well as his Twitter. So be sure you follow everything.
And the book.
Um,
Did you put the
yes.
link to the book?
No, I can do that right now, though. Hold on.
Okay.
Give me the title of the book.
Eurasia versus NATO
Yes,
Stan came
Eurasia
out
is
in the US a few days ago. So I need to start talking about the book. I haven't had
That's
time.
Clarity Press, correct? Yeah.
No, Nimble
No.
Books.
Nimble Books. Okay.
Yes.
Here we go. Okay, I have the link.
Excellent.
And it is
Thank you.
going in the video description as you depart. I'm going to stick around, everybody, so be sure to stick around with me. But Pepe, we'll have to get back together very soon. I will
Definitely.
be in
Thank
touch,
you.
especially as you're in Moscow.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, everybody. Next one is going to be from Moscow. Definitely.
All right.
Bye-bye. Cheers. Thank you.
Take care, Pepe. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Oops. Okay, everybody. That was Pepe Escobar being very generous with his time. Let me just get this in the video description. Pepe's new book. All right, there it goes. So you can find that. You can, of course, be sure to purchase that book. And also in the video description, I'm actually gonna cover one more story before I go. But in the video description, be sure to also support this channel on Patreon if you're able. Patreon.com/Dhaiphong. Annual membership options available. That helps keep this channel sustainable, cover any costs for labor, as well as technical and other needs for this channel. There's also Substack with annual memberships. You can be a YouTube member. I saw someone gift YouTube memberships, and I'll shout all you out in in a minute after this final story. And then of course there's the one-time options like Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, and others in the video description as well, which go a long way to help supporting this work. So with that said, everybody, stick around. We're going to do one more story. I wanted to cover one more Ukraine story. I was not able to go to fully with Pepe, but nonetheless. And also, I think there were folks who were interested in that BBC article and the cope and seethe of it from the Western mainstream media. So I can definitely put that all together. Okay, I'm going to put it all together so that we can, cover this. But I wanted to talk about Kuleba. I called him Kuleba. Kuleba's recent interview in the Foreign Policy magazine, telling us a lot about the status of this conflict. Okay. So I'm just pulling up the sources now for this. Here we go. All right. So let's get going. Keep hitting that like button, everybody, as you're sticking around. We're going to cover this one last story, then we will be out of here. Okay. Here we go. Most people who view this program have likely been to some form of schooling and education. And during our education, we are usually given at some point, regardless of the grade, regardless of the level of education, a project to pursue and complete and to be graded on. NATO has Project Ukraine, an experiment in attempting to provoke Russia into a broader war, which will eventually lead to Russia's downfall. This was mainly, believe it or not, concocted and was supposed to be an economic rather than a military project, meaning that the military means and ends were supposed to serve an economic collapse, which would then lead to regime change in Moscow. Of course, this has failed dramatically, with sanctions actually bolstering Russia's self-reliance, leading to sustained economic growth. But NATO has continued on its military side of this project too, only to find itself in a completely and utterly disastrous situation where Russia has taken command on the battlefield. It is only a matter of time now. Now, with this, there have been some pretty stark examples of Russia's success. We could look at the battlefield. We can look at Chasiv Yar and other villages and cities which are falling to Russia nearly by the day, leading to some to believe that 2025 will be the year, or at least leading into 2025 will be the year where this conflict could very well be settled, regardless of its attritional character. But this is also just an example of how absolutely, right, absolutely disastrous this project has become. Because much of this project was laid on the foundation that NATO and the United States have superior weaponry, which, when given to Ukraine, would lead to Russia's military, if not downfall, it would lead to such a quagmire that it would be bad for Russia. Remember, the United States and NATO have tried this before, 1979, in Afghanistan, to pull and draw Russia into a kinetic conflict, which would then, whether it's by proxy or direct, which would then lead to a completely destabilizing situation for the Russian government, at that time, the Soviet government. So here we have Russia flaunting Western military hardware captured in Ukraine. Sounds like Russia is doing quite okay, but the cope in the seethe is huge here. So this BBC so-called journalist, Steve Rosenberg, the so-called Russia editor, says, I'm in Victory Park in Moscow, a giant memorial complex dedicated to the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany. A new open-air exhibition has just opened. It has nothing to do with World War II, however. On display is Western military hardware captured by the Russian army in Ukraine. They are war trophies, and Russia decided to flaunt them. Among the armor here is British Army Husky tactical support vehicle, which had been donated to Ukraine. Its windscreen is covered in bullet holes. Opposite the Husky, I can see Western tanks that have been transferred to the Ukrainian military. There's an American Abrams, which had been damaged on the battlefield, a German Leopard tank too. In fact, there's a long line of German armor, and above it a sign, history is repeating itself. I mean, imagine the humiliation here. This is humiliating to the collective West. This is NATO completely being exposed by Russia's military superiority. And this is a genius political move because Russia has won over the global majority, and many people in the global majority in the global South and the countries oppressed and super exploited by the American empire and NATO believe that Russia's existential fight with Ukraine and NATO is in fact history repeating itself, leading to a potential world war scenario. So Russian authorities want the public to think the war in Ukraine and World War II have a common denominator. Russia is the victim, under attack from enemies abroad. In reality, these are two different wars. In 1941, Germany invaded Russia. In 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So this is supposed to be the basic logic that's supposed to own and expose Russia's duplicity and lies. But in fact, all they are doing is exposing themselves, because to believe that Russia just invaded out of the blue in 2022 without precipitants that could be seen as akin to invading Russia, what Ukraine was doing with NATO weaponry, what NATO was doing to bring its forces to the border, what NATO had planned for Ukraine, all of those were precipitants, which could very well be seen as having as its objective the invasion of Russia. So really silly Russia to believe it should preemptively defend its sovereignty when all the writing is on the wall that the overall aim of the American empire, of the neocons, of its NATO vassals is to, in fact, destroy and destabilize Russia. But it's packed out, the War Trophy exhibition was. In bright sunshine, Russians are crowding around the military hardware, posing for photographs in front of tank gun barrels, and from the sounds of it, thoroughly enjoying the display. It's incredible, jaw-dropping, said Natalia, who's here with her husband and small daughter. It's amazing to think our guys managed to get these trophies. More than 30 armored vehicles have been put on display. Look at that crowd. This is the BBC owning itself, essentially. This is the BBC showing Russia's military superiority. This is absolutely astounding in my estimation. The cope here and the seethe here is so astonishing. He is witnessing, this so-called journo in BBC is witnessing Russia's absolute superiority and the Russian people's support for Russia's Ukraine response. But why? Why are they huddling here? Russians have not invented the wheel here. In the past, Ukraine has displayed Russian military hardware that has been captured by Ukraine's army. But the Russian authorities, this exhibition has, I believe, several key objectives. The first is to reinforce the Kremlin's narrative that Ukraine, NATO, and the West as a whole are waging war on Russia. The aim here is to demonize the West yet further in the minds of Russians. In reality, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine, something Western leaders had urged Moscow not to do. It was President Putin's personal decision to launch what Russia refers to as a special military operation in Ukraine. So this is just cope and seethe here. First of all, it is quite clear that the United States has been plotting and planning a war on Russia for many, many, many years, going back to the Wolfowitz Doctrine, and even just going back in recent years before the special military operation. Seymour Hersh's, for example, revelations on Nord Stream talk about 2021, the United States, Germany, U.S. intelligence planning Nord Stream as a way not just to keep Germany down, but to also provoke Russia and destroy its economy. You can just look at what NATO has done to militarily encircle. We don't have to go on and on and on about it, but the military encirclement of Russia, the sanctions which predate the special military operation, the concerted attempts to try to support the so-called opposition. You remember Navalny. All of these things Russia defeated. Russia was well on the way and prepared for, but nonetheless, they all speak to war aims against Russia that the Western mainstream media wants you to forget. Then there's a historical symbolism. Right now, Victory Park is ablaze with red flags commemorating the upcoming Victory Day, May 9th national holiday, which marks Hitler's defeat. The venue for this exhibition and the timing feed that other official narrative I mentioned earlier, the one claiming a link between World War II and Ukraine. But there's a large element of gloating about this exhibition. Regarding the war in Ukraine, the Russians appear increasingly confident despite $61 billion package of U.S. assistance to Kiev. Moscow believes it now is the initiative on the battlefield. Russia's main message is written on a big sign beside the war trophy. It reads, "Our victory is inevitable." Imagine publishing this article. Actually, this is astounding to me. To publish this article and try to paint it as some kind of effective response. Actually, all this article really did, right, was show Russia actually does have the initiative. Russia is very confident right now that Russia doesn't really have anything to worry about. And we can just keep going on and on here. I'm just going to show you more of these photos. Okay. So here is Russia opening the exhibition. I'm just going to show you how Sputnik showed it. So here we go. I'm going to turn on the mute because there's nothing really to see. But this is what they're showing. They're showing the Abrams. They're showing the Leopards. They're showing all of these Western vehicles. Okay. And then we can go on. Here you go. There is, I believe that's the Abrams, correct? I can't read Russian, but I believe this is an Abrams tank. It has that American flag on it. Here, I believe this was probably a Leopard, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a military expert, but it's got that German flag on it. And then here you have some British. I wonder if these are Challengers or whatnot. But here is the British and NATO flag on this one. So there you have it. You have the gloating that the BBC was talking about. Now, I want to get into the story of Dmitry Kuleba, the so-called foreign minister in Ukraine. I use so-called because I don't believe Ukraine is a sovereign country. But here you have a question and answer how Kiev plans to use American aid. And you will see the cope and the sieve here as well when it comes to the foreign minister. And he goes after the United States quite starkly. So it says Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba joins Foreign Policy live. So I'm not going to play the video, but we're going to here is Ravi Agrawal of Foreign Policy magazine talking about the aid. And he said that the aid, what is the impact going to be? It's going to be a boost. If the package that was announced immediately after the adoption of law had contained a battery of Patriots, this boost would have been even stronger among the people because Ukrainians suffer most from missile attacks by Russia. So talking about the ballistic attacks by Russia, they've been mainly used to destroy our energy system. I will dare to say, and this is the cope and the seed, that Russia has been very effective at hitting Kiev's energy lines because it has a lot to do with its military capabilities. Does it change the military strategy for Ukraine, the aid package? So there's a time gap between the announcement of the aid package and the moment when a Ukrainian artilleryman has more shells to fire back at Russian invaders. That moment has not come yet because everything that was announced, we are grateful and we appreciate it, it's still on its way. And therefore, in this time gap, bad things may happen, such as the advance of Russian forces on the ground, admitting that there is a big time gap here. When is this weaponry actually going to be effectively used? The artillery ratio on the ground is incomprehensible. Basically, Ukrainian soldiers are starving because of lack of artillery ammunition. In the end, they get bombed and their positions get destroyed. So, we're going to get to the part where he starts coming after the United States. So what really matters in terms of the war is not only the quantity and quality of what is being provided, but the timeline. And unfortunately, I have to admit that Ukraine's allies are behind schedule despite their efforts. Some of them are making great effort. But when I look at what Russia has achieved in restoring production of its defenders' industrial base and what the entire West has achieved so far, we have to face the truth and recognize that Russia is more effective in the war effort. And this raises more fundamental questions to the West. If it cannot be efficient enough in this particular war effort, then how efficient can it be if other wars and crises of the same scale break out? So there you have Kuleba just absolutely coping, seething, talking about how this conflict, I mean, really what he's saying is that this conflict is essentially lost. The timing of this aid is not working out, and there is going to be just absolutely hell to pay from here on out. But I want to go now to what he says about the United States, okay? And what he says about the United States is very, very concerning, okay? And it should concern the United States. Here we go. This is where he talks about. So the question here is about Republicans, is about what J.D. Vance wrote. It's Ukraine's challenge, not the GOP. It's the math. He says you need more soldiers than you can ever field and more weapons than America can ever provide. He also cites you specifically, saying you keep asking for more Patriot interceptors, but you need thousands while America only makes 550 a year. How do you respond? So basically asking, what are the points that you have to make in response to political opposition in the United States to ongoing efforts to fund and arm Ukraine? And this is a stark thing that Foreign Policy magazine is admitting, that there is a need for thousands of Patriot interceptors, but the United States only produces 550 a year. This is true of most of the weaponry that Ukraine needs. So what does Kuleba say? let's see the silver lining here. When I look at the votes cast by members of the Republican Party in both houses of Congress, I don't get an impression that the opinion you mentioned represents a majority. If the war is only about math, you and I wouldn't be talking today because the position of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine would not exist anymore. We'd have lost the war already. Look at the map and at the size of the country that invaded Ukraine. And look at the size of Ukraine, but pure mathematical calculations, we were supposed to be swallowed. That was actually a projection of the best military and best and political analysts ahead of the invasion. I would like to remind everyone that we were given between 7 to 10 days before everything would be done, and partners would come to our funeral with solemn speeches about the importance of respecting international law and rules-based order. So here we go. The third argument is the most important one, where he starts lambasting the United States. But on the surface, you could say, okay, Kuleba, you've got a point. You've got a point that Ukraine was essentially supposed to fall very quickly. But what happened was that NATO came in with all of its arms, weapons, support. And that's why Ukraine was propped up. It became an attritional conflict because it wasn't just Ukraine versus Russia anymore. It was Ukraine. It was Russia versus NATO. And Russia changed its strategy, knowing that a confrontation with NATO would be catastrophic, and that with all the sanctions that began to be leveled upon it, Russia had to reorient itself and focus on other matters. So the war and conflict became attritional. Doesn't mean that Ukraine was so resilient. Look, Scott Ritter comes on my program all the time, talks about Ukrainians fighting with just absolute passion, with commitment, and none of that I'm going to put into question. Indeed, if hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have put their lives on the line, even for an absolutely just reactionary, despicable cause, put your lives on the line, really to give up your own sovereignty, to give up your own dignity for the sake of fighting NATO's war on Russia, whether they know it or not. I'm not going to question the commitment to that. I will question the just as Russia does and so much of the world does, why you would do such a thing. But nonetheless, the point is that Russia is actually winning the conflict, and attritional warfare is just different. And it was never the case that Russia was just going to collapse just because it had chosen many different means for fighting this conflict, given changing circumstances. After that period, that Mr. Kuleba is trying to emphasize as a reason why Ukraine is on the should be on that it should be more optimistically seen. Ukraine should be in its current status. This has been the spin, right? That Ukraine has been able to hold its own. It's this little engine that could, but in reality, all it is a pawn of NATO, and whatever strategy Russia has changed, whatever reforms it has made with the understanding that it's NATO that it is concerned about, not Ukraine. So here's a third argument. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, says Kuleba, you have to remember one thing: security and prosperity of America stems from the current world order. If that world order ceases to exist, security and prosperity of American taxpayers will be under attack. If you cannot satisfy military means, you cannot produce enough interceptors to help Ukraine win the war against a country that wants to destroy the world order, then how are you going to win the war against perhaps an enemy stronger than Russia? Think 2 steps ahead. People come up with some credible arguments to explain why Ukraine does not deserve to be supported. But the very fact is, if you lose Ukraine, it'll have a domino effect everywhere. This is why I mentioned the difference in the defense industrial base between Russia and all our Western allies together. In 2 years of the war, Russia has become more efficient in producing weapons than the whole Western alliance. It's a bad sign. Things need to change if we are serious about defending the world as we know it. Essentially, what Kuleba is saying here is that the United States needs to step up its defense production. It needs to do what it cannot do. It needs to do what it won't do. And not only to save Ukraine, but to save the world, to preserve hegemony. Because that's what, imagine this little pawn of a puppet state lecturing the hegemon about what will be best, not just for U.S. hegemony, but for the people of the United States, the people of the United States, which have seen no benefits from this disastrous NATO-driven conflict. There have been no economic benefits to this. There have no jobs benefits to this. This has been an outright siphoning of public coffers to a war effort that is all about increasing the dangers of a major confrontation between U.S., NATO, and Russia. And It is about preserving hegemony, which is not enjoyed by the fruits of that are not enjoyed by all people of the United States. They're enjoyed by a very tiny few. So it's absolutely astounding that Kuleba can make that kind of lecture. But the point is for Kuleba is to push through Foreign Policy magazine, increase defense spending, military spending by the United States for the purpose of increasing production, with the admission that Russia's military industrial complex, its ability to produce weapons, its ability to then not only produce these weapons, but to deploy them, to have them come into operational use, is by far faster, better, and more effective than what Ukraine is doing. NATO is having their weapons be put on display. Russia is having their weapons used on the battlefield in order to make progress on the front lines. Kuleba knows this, and that's why he is begging, berating really the United States to come to its senses, preserve your world order, and be sure to spend all that you have. It'll benefit your people, he says. The Foreign Policy magazine, which, mind you, nobody reads Foreign Policy magazine in the United States. We have to be quite honest about that. Absolutely nobody reads Foreign Policy magazine in the United States except for a very, very, very small section of the population. Nobody is going to be reading this who is actually affected by the tens of billions, if not over 100 billion now that the United States, yes, it's over 100 billion now that the United States has spent on Ukraine aid since 2022. Really, what people are looking at in the United States is how is this war serving them? And they're saying it's not. And that's why public opinion has shifted quite dramatically. It's why the Republicans in an election year want to use this for political brownie points. The Republicans aren't for peace. Don't worry. The Republicans don't care about peace. Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't care about peace. She's perfectly fine with U.S. aid to Israel to commit genocide in Gaza, to create a West Asia powder keg, because that is not as politically important as being able to exploit the Ukraine issue for political gain. The Republicans are not going to do that with Gaza because of the Israel lobby. There's no Ukraine lobby, right? So the Republican Party doesn't really have much to worry about there. The permanent deep state military state, they'll just continue what they always do, and they'll ignore what the Republicans have to say. The Israel lobby, though, that's a whole nother story. If you question the Israeli apartheid, genocide, if you question the Zionist entity and its influence over Washington, you could very well lose your job. Ask Cynthia McKinney about what it means to be ousted from political office because of opposition to Israeli war crimes. She was ousted from the Congress because of that. In any event, the point to be made, the point that should stick, is that Ukraine is in a really desperate situation at this moment. At any point during the summer of 2024, we could see many dominoes continue to fall on the front line, and Russia not only have the initiative and seize the initiative, but Russia be in the driver's seat toward an ultimate end goal, an ultimate ending of this conflict. Didn't think we would get here. Attrition is slow. Predictions are tough to make, but everything points to Ukraine, regardless of what the $61 billion, only a fraction of that going to military assistance, will do. All signs point to it's not going to, not only is not going to change things, but Russia still has a lot left up its sleeve. And Russia, in this exhibition in Moscow of NATO military equipment, said, the BBC journalist, Mr. Rosenberg, had this victory will be ours. That is Russia's ultimate objective. That is ultimately what is to come. It's only a matter of time from here. All right, everybody, let me give shout outs. Before I head out of here, okay? So first, shout out to all the Patreon subscribers who have been so loyal and so generous with your support. You can subscribe annually in the video description. All of it goes back to supporting this work, supporting the labor and the technical costs that are associated with it. So very much appreciated. And of course, helping me remain in the remain living as stably as I can within a very chaotic and unstable U.S. Imperial economy. Now, what Substack, for those who are in the audience, thank you so much as well. You can subscribe annually there too. YouTube members, I don't know if I've caught anyone here. I know Where Pilgrim is a YouTube member and a moderator, so shout out to all the moderators. By the way, we have a lot here today. Desert Mantis, Quantum Alchemist, a lot of, I believe we had Joe WS here. We have David K here as well as a moderator. Yes, Joe WS was here. So we have many moderators in the audience. I don't see any other members, but shout yourself out if you want to just leave a quick message, a quick chat, and I can shout you out as well. Now, of course, I am very much appreciative of all the one-time donors as well on PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. Find that in the video description too. And now I'm going to go into the super chats, which I will now shout out folks who gave super chats, which is another way you can one-time donate to this program when it goes live. Hussein Brazil says nobody even spells the word Iran since. Spells the word Iran since. That must be in response to Iran's response, and I believe so as well. West Wolf says great to see Pepe back. It was. I'm so glad I was able to do this at this early hour. And then we have Hussein Brazil, and here we have two giants that resist the empire. Not sure who you're referring to, Hussein, but I can guess Russia, China, perhaps. West Wolf says, "Great to catch stream live, Danny. It's hard from Australia." Yeah, well, you got that. I don't even know. Is it 12 hours like China, or is it even worse? Because I get it. I was just in China. I'm still jet lagged, and we are now. I've been back for nearly a week. AK Lee says, glad I'm able to join the live video. Respect to Pepe, Scott, and Ray McGovern. Indeed, this is a very generous super chat from Hong Kong dollars, at least. Umit Dolap says, thank you for the generous super chat, by the way, 20 euros. Dear Danny and Pepe, something seems to be stirring in Georgia. Protests intensifying. Can you give us your thoughts? Sorry, did not get to get these questions. You know, Pepe does run a tight ship. He's a very busy guy. So sorry, I didn't get to questions with him because I had so many things I wanted to talk to him about. But yes, things are stirring in Georgia. I think Scott Ritter is covering that very soon. You should watch his program on Rumble, Scott Ritter Live. I believe that's happening soon. Maybe Garland and Scott covered it today too. I have not been covering this question yet. Brian Berletic, I know, has. You can go to his channel. Yeah, things are definitely stirring. Looks like an NED operation. Georgia, of course, has this long history since the fall of the Soviet Union, where the United States, I believe, wanted to admit that country into NATO. But anyway, here we go. We have five. No, one more. Oh, here we go. Toby Clear, thank you for the super chat. Lots of free. Yes, I remember this is the book. Okay, World Teacher for All Humanity by Benjamin Cream. All right. Then Tunke, sorry if I'm butchering your name. Yildirim gifted 5 memberships, so that is very much appreciated, Tunke. Thank you. Far generous super sticker. Thank you. John, Serious Truth Seekers. Encourage, try the Master's Path. Okay, another PDF book. Thank you. West Wolf, can we send macaroni to Ukraine? You know, when I was in Europe, man, so much of Europe hates. The more east you go in Europe, whoa, the feelings towards Macron go south. How many, even Brussels, a lot of really anti-Macron sentiment in Brussels. I mean, I can imagine people being pretty angry at the EU, NATO establishment there, given that's where it's headquartered. You can, I saw it in Berlin, everywhere, everywhere. Not a lot of people like Macron, and I wonder why. Not hard to see why. We have a super sticker by Kuznetsky Bassane. Thank you so much. We have Dujema Boutique Dejuma. The Juma Batik. American people's hard-earned donations for the 1%. Yeah. Yep. Sonny Robinson. Only 23% of my American F-35s are online. My America is unpatriotic. We're not ready for war. We will lose. Yeah. Yeah. Well, patriotism. It's a very big question. I've been on many sides of the debate about patriotism. I'm not going to knock anyone who is, patriotic for their country. I have huge qualms, of course, with American patriotism over its history and what it's been used for by the ruling elite. When it comes to individual people who may feel patriotic because they grew up here, they grew up with the symbolism, what have you, I can understand that. That is something that is very understandable. Of course, there's a big gap between what the people learn, what they go through, and then what the elites and what they do and how they deploy patriotism to justify wars, to justify oppression, to justify many things. But at the same time, it's such an interesting thing that's happening now is that for people who consider themselves patriotic, they are having just so much thrown at them as to why the United States is a really difficult place to defend. It's whatever, whether it's what's happening to the students all across the country who are setting up just encampments, just tents. They're just sitting on so-called private property. Mind you, I want to just say, if you believe that college campuses are simply just private property of some property owners, real estate developers, and the administrators that are in cahoots with them. Remember, Columbia, a place like Columbia, Temple, these universities, especially in the big cities, happen to be the biggest real estate owners, landlords in these locales. Columbia, the biggest landlord in New York City. So if you want to consider that and say, okay, well, Columbia is a landlord and has the right to protect its private property, do you be on that side? But let me just say, look at the cost of tuition at Columbia. How many of those students have to take out loans? How many are just paying privately? Regardless of the method, students are paying for that education at a rate, at a dollar amount that most people don't make in 2 years, let alone 1 year. About 50, usually it's 50K plus per year, plus or minus books, room and board, right? If you count those things, it gets up to 60 plus. So all that is to say, to make an argument that these students are encroaching on private property, very, 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 very difficult to make, given that do tenants have rights? Do people who live in apartments, who live on residency have rights? I think they do. I think they do. And if they want to sit out on a yard, sit out in a building where they live, and protest the genocide in Gaza, does that give the right for the landlord to call the police on them? I mean, just think about this for a minute. So whether it's that, the brutality of the police and the Zionists and all these forces repressing these students who are simply just opposed to the genocide in Gaza, and perhaps their universities role in it, whether it is the ongoing encroachment in civil liberties, and of course the repression of other protest movements of the recent past, whether it's what the United States is doing to Julian Assange, whether it's what the United States is doing in its foreign policy from Ukraine to West Asia to the Asia Pacific. We can go on and on whether what the United States is doing economically, how it is prioritizing the profits of the rich over the rest. All of whatever you're looking at, it's hard for most Americans to be proud of the United States. This is the argument I've been making for many, many years. There's a lack of congruence there. If that makes you double down on patriotism, okay. That makes you critical of it, okay. Regardless, I'm more concerned about where you stand. Do you stand on the right side of history? Do you stand right? That's why I talk to Scott Ritter all the time. I don't dislike Scott Ritter for being a patriot, to being patriotic. It's his history. It's gone through years. That's his history. It's not my history, right? It's not mine. But doesn't mean that we aren't together in the same fight. So it's just so interesting now that so many people in the United States, regardless of whether they're super patriotic or whether they've always been questioning it, or whether it just doesn't cross their mind to be patriotic or not, or what have you, how they feel about the United States. Most people now are very disillusioned, very unhappy with the current situation in the United States, its policies, domestic and abroad. And I think it lends itself to some very interesting opportunities to make some real changes right here. So I am optimistic. Okay. And that's why this channel brings you optimism. That's why I bring on Pepe Escobar to bring you news from the optimistic side of the world, the multipolar world, where development is happening. It's becoming much more people centered by the minute, by the second, by the day. That's why I bring on folks to talk about what's really happening in Ukraine. It's why when I'm in China, I try to talk to people as much as I can. It's why I try to keep a positive outlook here. I don't do the atrocity. It's not propaganda, but I don't do, okay, well, here's how many people in Palestine, Gaza are dying. Here's the ways that they're dying. I don't really do that. I will point you to great channels that do that work and do it very importantly, from Electronic Intifada, Richard Medhurst, coming on May 8th, by the way. Richard Medhurst will be coming on May 8th. Folks like that who do the really hard work, and I want to boost them, bolster them, tell you to go to them if you're not already following them. Katie Halper and those folks. But I don't do that here. The reason why I don't do that here is not because I couldn't. I could easily scour the news and constantly tell you, hey, here's the human rights workers that have been, massacred in Gaza. Here are the people. Here's the numbers. Could certainly do that. However, this channel emphasizes this changing world as a whole, and it looks at all of the flashpoints to help us understand where the world is going and how we can play a positive role in it, which includes, of course, telling the United States, telling Israel, and then making them do this, holding them to account that they need to stop this genocide. But it also includes being an active participant in understanding the broader world around us so that we can move in it, we can become a force within it. And when we do get that chance to seize the time and finally become agents of history, where we do have the power to determine the destiny of where the United States, if we call it that, after whatever process we need to go through, a political process to change this thing, then we are ready to align ourselves with the rest of the world making progress toward peaceful development, multipolarity, self-determination, etc. And that's what I hope this channel builds the rudiments of, at least in our consciousness, in our minds, what we know, what we are to believe. So with all that said, I'm going to get off my soapbox. All right. We're heading into the second hour here. I'm going to let you all go. A few announcements before I go. Next stream, unclear when that will be, but it's likely going to be a little while from now. Okay. So we're looking probably into the second week of May, the beginning of the second week of May. I said before, Richard Medhurst, I have him confirmed for 7:15 p.m. Eastern time on May 8th. That might be the next time I stream, unless something really big happens. But I'm looking forward to having Richard back on the show. I've been trying to get it for a while because good friend, very much aligned. I want to support. I want people like Richard to be supported and for us to support each other through these very, 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 very interesting times. So that's the next guest. And then after that, it's kind of open. We'll see what happens for the rest of May. Of course, I'll be streaming when I can and be available. I don't really have anyone confirmed just yet, I don't think. But I will be trying to get some more folks on here to talk about developments as they emerge worldwide. And then June will be kind of slow here. I'm going on another break. I'm going on a real break, not a work break like going to China was, but I will be going on a real break in mid-June. So a lot of reporting to do. Hopefully I can get Pepe from Moscow, maybe even Scott Ritter too when he's there in June, because he's going as well to Russia in a month. Okay, everybody. With that said, we are out of here. All right. Hit that like button before you go. Hit that subscribe button before you go. Hit that notifications bell before you go. If you have not yet, go to the video description and find all the ways you can support this work before you go. Patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Subscribe annually for all kinds of goodies from a free PDF of my 2019 book to the ability to submit questions, to communicate with me directly, as well as other exclusive things. You can do Substack as well annually. You can become a YouTube member. You can buy me a coffee, PayPal. Find this all in the video description, or of course, hit that join button to become a YouTube member. All right, everybody, I am out of here. Take care. Have a good rest of your weekend, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.